Harriet Tubman, born sometime between 1820 and 1825, died 1913. Harriet Tubman, originally named Araminta Harriet Ross, was born a slave in Dorchester County, Maryland. Her mother, Harriet Green, or Rit, was owned by a Mary Brodess, while her father, Ben Ross, was owned by an Anthony Thompson, who later married Mary Brodess. Araminta, or Minty, was one of 9 children born to Rit and Ben between 1808 and 1832. Rit was assigned to the big house as a cook, while Ben was a skilled woodsman who managed the timber on Thompson's large plantation. Harriet's parents, as with many slaves at the time, struggled to keep their family together. Mary Brodess's son Edward sold 3 of Harriet's sisters to distant plantations. When Mary Brodess received an offer from a trader from Georgia for Rit's youngest son Moses, she hid him for a month and exclaimed, "The first man that comes into my house, I will split open his head." The sale was abandoned, and this successful resistance set a powerful example for a young Harriet. Harriet spent much of her childhood hired out to other slave owners who regularly beat and whipped her. She recounted a particular day when she was lashed 5 times before breakfast. She bore the scars of this abuse for the rest of her life. Perhaps her worst injury occurred one day while she was sent to a dry goods store for supplies. There she encountered a runaway slave being pursued by his overseer. When the man demanded she help him restrain the runaway, she refused, and the furious overseer threw a 2-pound weight which struck her in the head. Harriet did not receive medical attention for 2 days, and as a result, she suffered seizures, severe headaches, and narcoleptic episodes. She believed her hair may have saved her life, saying it had never been combed and stood out like a bushel basket. Harriet was illiterate as a child and was passed down Bible stories by her mother. A devout Christian in adulthood, she rejected the subjugating teachings of the New Testament and instead found inspiration in the Old Testament tales of deliverance. Harriet experienced incredibly vivid dreams and visions, which she interpreted as premonitions from God. Harriet's father Ben was freed from slavery at the age of 45, as stipulated in the will of a previous owner, but continued to work for the Thompsons. Her mother Rit was still a slave, as were their children, as the law dictated that it was the mother's status that determined the freedom of any children. Although a similar legal arrangement for Rit's freedom existed, the Brodess family ignored it and refused to free her and her children. Despite his status, Ben had little power to appeal their decision. In 1844, Harriet married a free man named John Tubman and officially changed her name from Araminta. In 1849, Harriet became ill, diminishing her value as a slave, so Edward Brodess tried to sell her. In later life, Harriet recalled that she began to pray to God that he might change her master's mind, but when Edward continued to try to find a buyer, she began to pray for his death. Soon after, Edward died, and his widow Eliza began organizing the sale of the family's slaves. Refusing to let the Brodess family decide their fates, Harriet began to plan their escape, despite her husband's best efforts to dissuade her. On the 17th of September 1849, while they were hired out to the Thompsons, Harriet and 2 of her brothers escaped. As they were hired out to another household at the time, it was 2 weeks before Eliza Brodess noticed they were missing, and posted a runaway notice offering a reward of up to $100 per slave. Harriet's brothers had second thoughts and decided to return to the Brodesses, so after delivering them safely home, she made the roughly 90-mile journey to Pennsylvania alone on foot. Harriet made use of the Underground Railroad, a network of routes and safe houses for fugitive slaves, organized by freed slaves and abolitionists. The perilous journey entailed traveling by night, guided only by the North Star, in order to avoid slave catchers, and would have taken her up to 3 weeks to complete. On the 18th of September 1850, Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Law, which heavily punished those abetting escape and forced law officials, even in states which had outlawed slavery, to assist in the capture of fugitives. By December, Harriet had decided to return to Maryland for her family, and on her first trip she guided her niece, her niece's husband, and their 2 children from Baltimore to Philadelphia, after they narrowly escaped from their own sale. The next spring, she returned to Maryland again, this time recovering her youngest brother Moses and 2 other male slaves. In 1851, Harriet made her 3rd journey back to Maryland to find her husband, only to discover he had remarried and preferred to remain where he was. Never one to miss an opportunity, Harriet found a group of slaves trying to escape and took them back to Philadelphia with her. In 1851, Harriet led a group of 11 fugitives to Ontario, and there is evidence to suggest that their party stopped at the home of abolitionist and former slave Frederick Douglass. As part of the British Empire, slavery had been abolished in Canada since 1834. Over 11 years, Harriet rescued around 70 slaves over 13 expeditions, including 3 of her other brothers, their wives, and some of their children. One of her last missions into Maryland was to retrieve her parents. Harriet managed to rescue her aging parents and deliver them safely to the rest of their family in the growing community of fugitive slaves in Ontario. Be sure to follow the link in the description for part 2 of this video, and thanks for stopping by Weird Wonderful Women, the channel dedicated to all those weird and wonderful ladies who dared to be different.